the JQuery section here. Now there's a very, it's a useful enough course. As I said, there's free courses around the place, so don't be afraid to step out and take some of them. There's one there that's quite good in codeacademy.com. But it used to be a couple of years ago when I done it. I presume it still is, but I'm sure there's other resources out there. There's a PDF there with an intro to jQuery, and there's also an email list example. So again, this intro to jQuery is coming from Moroc's book. It's chapter 5 in the book if you have it. And the email example is just starter files to kind of allow you to carry on as we're going through this. Essentially what happens is join the email list, you get something that looks a little bit like that, although it doesn't, because I think the CSS is involved in it. It allows you to put in an address. If you put in one that's different, you don't enter it and you do join our request list, nothing happens. Okay, so that's fine. What we're hoping to get out of it at the end, though, is something like this, where we can put in an email address. If we put in a slightly different one, or if we don't enter in first name, when we click on join our list, it comes up, this entry must be equal first entry, this field is required. So that type of scenario is what has been looked at there. Okay. So that's what this is going to do, but it's going to use jQuery to actually do that. So I'll quickly go through this because it's sort of self-explanatory as such. The checklist here. You can get jQuery at jQuery.com. If you go to jQuery.com, over here. This is the jQuery site. There's information what jQuery is, different examples on how to use it. There's full API documentation, so you can go through the full documentation of what you can do with it and so forth. You can download it, so there's different ways of downloading it. You can download the actual files. You can download, and probably the handiest way of doing it is to go with the CDN, which is Content Delivery Network. So there's information in on that, but we'll cover all of that as we go through the slides here. Okay, so that's it. So I suppose what is jQuery? So it's a small, fast, and feature-rich JavaScript library. Okay, so we've JavaScript, and as anybody who's used JavaScript over the last period of time will realize there's a lot actually in it, and to actually get at and useful, there's a fair bit of work you have to do, and you'll tend to find that you're doing a lot of things repetitively. So what a lot of parts of the industry came together, well, particularly with Google and some of the others, Microsoft, and they came together and said, listen, let's put together some standardized JavaScript libraries that we can, that everybody uses, and then we can build on from that. So you start to have rather than having to go to a building site to build a house, you start making the blocks. You can actually, just buy the blocks in and start, designing your house and building your house with kind of pre-existing methods and functions and objects and so forth. And that essentially is all jQuery is. Okay, so it's a bunch of libraries. So in the same way that you're using Java, and you load up different libraries, jQuery is just a different library for that. Now, there's different ways of looking at it and getting jQuery. If you look at the jQuery to actually download it, they've got compressed files, which essentially look like this. So all the white space has been taken out of them. Okay. You have uncompressed files then, which look like this. So they actually have all the white spaces there, so you can actually read them as functions and such. And that's kind of handy enough if you're doing any kind of troubleshooting and you're having problems. When you use the debugger on your browser, it will actually go into these methods and functions of that. So it can be useful sometimes, particularly when you're getting things working. The problem, of course, is that the uncompressed files are actually very large in terms of kilobytes and so forth, whereas the compressed one, because there's no white space, it's nice and small, and there's not a real problem with it. So you can, if you like, you can download the files, put them onto your server, and link them directly as you would any other JavaScript file. Or alternatively, probably the one that we kind of use most of the time now is to use a content delivery network or a CDN. So again, you can look at the just go to https://jquery.com, and you've got the different versions of it there. So version 3 is the current one, 3.5.1. And again, you can download the uncompressed version, or you can link to the uncompressed version, the minified one, which is the reduced one. There's a slim and slim minified one, which I'm not exactly too sure. It's worth investigating them, but essentially they've scaled back on what's actually in them. Okay, you could look at some of the older versions of jQuery 2 and 1 if you wish, but we might as well stick with the latest. The files that I've downloaded there have got a link to, I think it's version 2.1, but you can link it down to version 3. What you do here is to link it, you just click on the whichever one you want. So click on the uncompressed one, and it gives you a link here. Now, a note, this happened to me today when I was trying it out. It's using the integrity and the cross origin attributes. Okay. However, if you look in NetBeans, you're using it, it will actually show that up as an error, and it actually tells you that absolute integrity not allowed on element script at this point. Okay, but however, if you run it, it works fine. So you can ignore that particular error such there. Okay, so just close that there backwards. Oh yeah, the other thing I want to look at there are other versions as well. You have jQuery UI, and we'll be using that at some stage. Some really interesting stuff there in terms of things you can do with UI, in terms of putting in tabs and even having nice login buttons and so forth. It's all geared up for a user interface. So again, it's worth having a look at on it. Okay. So that's the jQuery UI. So it's just really the key I find with jQuery. You know, I've mentioned this before. I'm not a great lover of JavaScript, but jQuery makes it quite easy, because what you do is you can actually use jQuery, and it's based on the idea that you have, the document itself. Whereas in JavaScript we would go document dot, and then would be get element by ID or whatever. What you're able to do with jQuery is you just use the dollar symbol, and that essentially is the document. And you can then, your selector, so what element you want to select, can be based exactly the same as it would be with CSS. So you can base it on the tag, which will cover all the tags of that name. You can base it on an ID, which would be that specific ID. You can base it on the class, or you can base it on a combined or a hybrid of the three of them. Okay, so it gets very, very easy, I think, to select, and because you're using sort of the same methodology in terms of like CSS and jQuery, then for selectors it's really good. But essentially what happens is when you have a selector, there are then a whole series of predefined functions that have been created that you can use. So if you want to, for example, see if a particular element has, or say ID has been clicked, you can just do dollar, and then within brackets the ID dot click. Okay, you don't have to go into the element and say like unclick and have a function that's called and then declare that function and so forth. So it's really, really powerful in that sense, I find, and it's a bit more programmy kind of than JavaScript always seems to be. You're looking at the properties within properties, or within objects within properties and so forth. It gets very confusing for me. So you have loads of selectors, there's loads of methods, there's loads of event methods. So just makes it easy. And as I said, what has happened here is that the methods and the event methods that have been created are ones that we generally would use. So if you, for example, with the jQuery UI, if you want to create tabs, sure, you can create them in but hey, it's been already created for you in the jQuery, so it's good. And also a big key to it is it provides cross-browser compatibility, which is really cool. So you don't have to worry about that. That's been organized for you. The selectors are compliant with CSS3, and there's a compressed library, so it loads quickly and doesn't downgrade performance. Nice thing with using the CDN, of course, is that if you've downloaded it, it'll keep it in cache. So particularly if you're a mobile user, it'll say, oh yeah, I've already downloaded this, so I don't have to do it again. Okay, so it can be useful for that if you're doing a lot of browsing. So if a different website has actually downloaded the CDN, you're able to kind of use it again. So the FAQs, application browser, what is jQuery? Why is jQuery becoming so popular? Why is it harder to learn, or what is harder to learn, jQuery or JavaScript? I would suggest JavaScript is harder. Okay, so this is just the code for it. What we've done here is we've got a H2 with a href on it, and so forth there. Some critical CSS, so there's just some CSS there. Okay. Now this is where we start looking at normally what we're looking at here. We're dollar document.ready. Okay. Now this is a great one to actually use because the dollar, of course, symbolizes that it's going to use jQuery. Okay. Document then is the selector, so it's the full document as normal. .ready. One of the problems we have with JavaScript, okay, and you can still have it with jQuery if you didn't do it right, is that it resolves all. Remember that this is an interpretive methodology that's used in the browser. So it's going to, when it comes across a function, it is going to try and resolve that function or any elements in that function to what's actually existing. So what's come before it, if you like. So if you have your JavaScript at, say, the very beginning of the page, some of those elements may not have actually been interpreted yet by the browser. So the result of that is that it can't find them and you have a problem. So that's why a lot of people were putting their JavaScript at the very bottom of a HTML file. So the idea there was that there was a greater chance or greater probability that all of the preceding elements on the page will have loaded at that point in time. Though that's not always 100% guaranteed because of the way the browsers operate. So in order to fully ensure it, what we can do, and what we've been doing sometimes, is to use the unload inside of the body. So we check to see if the unload has actually worked or event has occurred. And that indicates that the full page is actually loaded. And then we would run all of our JavaScript. This document.ready is, I think, should be, if we're using jQuery at all, should be the first thing that we put in to our script. Because what happens then is all of our jQuery scripts will then go inside the code braces for the document.ready function. Okay. That way we're sure, we're 100% confident that all of these elements will resolve themselves when the full page is loaded. This brings in another key thing, particularly with the use of MVCs we spoke about last week, is that we need to ensure that we've got a properly fully formed page, because the unload won't trigger until the page is fully loaded. Okay, in which case none of your jQuery would load, in which case none of the functionality you want to put into your page would be active. So it's important on that. So again, if we look at this, we'll see that we've got the document ready function, bracket, and then our code block. So from there down to the end of the ready. So we're going from this parenthesis here down to this parenthesis here. All of our functions and methods that we want to call, all our event handlers and so forth, all have to be within that function. So here we have then an example of a selector. So here we've got a selector where we're saying that it's a hash, so that means it's an ID. FAQs, so it's looking for a hash FAQs, and it's also looking for a H2. Okay, if we look back up here in the code that was delivered out here, we've got the main and the ID is FAQs, and what it's now saying is any H2 that's in there, that one there, and this one here, are going to be selected. Okay, so any of those H2s that click. So if either of them click, okay, and immediately you start seeing a benefit here, okay, because we haven't, nowhere in the HTML code have we put in an unclick event handler. We call a function, so that function is going to run from there down to there, the end of click, and it's got then use $this, okay. So what's actually happening here is whichever selector, okay, has been clicked, that object is passed to this function. Okay, so then that object then is this. So this dot toggle class minus. What it's going to do is it's going to toggle the class. It's going to add the class minus to it. So this is pseudo class that's been added. Then it's going to, if this dot attribute class not equal to minus. Okay, so if it's not minus, then it'll hide it. Else this dot next, it will show. Okay, so think of what's happening here. We've got two of them. Okay, so it's going to the first one. If this one is not minus, you want to hide the next one. Okay, if it is minus, you want to show the next one. So we're using a plus and minus here to open and expand. Okay, so it gives the impression then that we can actually click something here. This has become so popular. We click it, it'll hide, and the other one will show up in it. Okay. This is an example of an accordion here. And again, sort of the same type of idea here, document.ready. We've got hash accordion. So we've got this JQuery UI accordion. So that's an actual script. So again, in order for that to work, you'll need to have the JQuery accordion or JQuery UI in on it, which I don't think is shown here anywhere. No. Okay. We'll see the code later on. So again, these are all pre-built functions that are available. So the accordion is where we span up and down like a musical accordion. So some typical plugin functions: data validation, slideshows, carousels, all that kind of stuff with jQuery is brilliant. Terms there. So downloading jQuery, we kind of covered that. Okay, obviously this here is all out of date. But you'll get the latest ones from the jQuery. Now the code, as I said, that I'm using here, I've just got that from the jQuery.com site. Okay, so we've got the source with HTTPS. It's a jQuery here, 3.5.1.min. Okay, then it just has this integrity and the cross origin. Okay, you don't need those two. It will work without it. Okay, but they're just giving an added bit of security, which is kind of always good to have. So you could there. Now the syntax for a selector is $bracket quote selector double quote end of bracket. Okay, so that selects the element that we're talking about. Okay. Now, if we done dollar just P, it would select all the P elements. We're doing dollar hash FAQs, so that is the ID that is FAQ. So it selects that element, which in this case is main, I think, isn't it? Yeah, so main. So it'll select that complete element there. Okay. Inside that, then it's got a number of sub elements. It's got a H1, a H2, a div, a P, another H2, another div, a P, a UL, a couple of LIs, and that's it. Okay, and we can then address each of them as like, okay, individually, as we saw previously. And then it can select a class. So dot minus is a class. So there's no dot minus shown there. I don't think is there. Yeah, there is class dot minus. Okay. Now, how to select elements by relationship. So you have descendants. So all P elements that are descendants of the main. So FAQ, hash FAQs, P are all the descendants. Adjacent siblings. Okay, so it's H2 plus div. Okay, so that's remember how this is all working, right? You've got your HTML. Then at the next level, you've got your head and your body. Then inside your body, then you have the other elements. So it's all working in kind of like a family tree. There's a hierarchy associated with the whole thing. Anything that's on the same level then are siblings. You've got parents and you've children. Okay. So what we're looking at here, this one here is H2 plus div. So that's adjacent siblings, H2. General siblings, all P elements are siblings of the UL elements. And you've got tilde in there in the middle. Okay, that's squiggle, it's called tilde. And then children, all UL elements that are children of div elements. So it's div greater than UL. So again, you can see here in the code what they're talking about there. So that would be these boys here. Okay. And it's good to play around with these, because sometimes we get very much sucked into just using the ID or the ID in a class, but it can be handy sometimes, particularly if you're cycling through siblings. It's kind of really useful. You can code using multiple selectors. So we've got hash FAQs, so it's in the ID FAQs, li, comma, div, and p. So that's be p's inside the div that are inside FAQs, as well as the LIs that are inside FAQs. Okay, And again, here you've got P plus UL and div tilde P, same type of idea. So the syntax for calling a jQuery method is the $bracket double quote selector dot and then the method name and then any parameters if that's the case. Okay, so some of the common jQuery methods are val, which will return the value of the element that you've selected. Val with a value in the parentheses, which will allow you to set a value. Text, which will give you the text value allows you to change the value. Next and the type. Submit, focus. So there are common ones. And what you tend to find with this is you get into the habit of using certain ones. Okay. So to get the value of a text box, you have var gallons is equal to $, and your selector here dot val. Okay. To set the value of an input element, just setting that to null. How to set text in an element, again, you're looking at here, text, and then the actual text is inside the parentheses. Change the text, so last name dot next dot text, last name as required. So you're just going through the next one. How to submit a form dot submit. So you don't actually need somebody to click a button. You can actually submit it yourself if some other event happens. And how to move the focus of a form control or link. You just do, in this case, hash email underscore address dot focus. So that's putting the focus into that input. Selector for a jQuery event is dot event method name. So event methods ready and click are the two common ones that are used. Okay. But again, you can see all of the events. If you go to the jQuery documentation or API documentation, again, you can put in search here for events. And it gives you these are all the different events that you could be looking at here: blur, focus, load, resize, scroll, blah, 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 loads of them. Okay. Alert, the DOM is ready. So what this will do is when the page is loaded, it will put up that alert. Okay. Now you can do that a short way, right? So here we do $document, right? We can just do $, okay? And then we don't need the dot ready because that there is really telling us that this will only happen when it is ready, okay? So again, it's a bit of shorthand that can be a handy thing to use. We could do $h2.click, okay? So it just removes some of the other bits on it there. Boom, boom, boom. So terms, so this is the what we're looking at there. Okay, I'd say that code is on Moodle. So again, here what you're going to put in there is get the latest jQuery. Leave all that stuff there, and then you start writing your jQuery there. So I'm just going to let you work away on doing that. Okay, and as I said, what you should do then is end up with some interesting stuff the same way that I was working on this one here. Okay. Some other things to be aware of, some of the other selectors that you have here. Okay. And again, remember you can look in on the diagnostic or the debugging information on your browser. Okay. So you can go into your development tools, put in a break and actually see what's happening there. When you actually select an object or an ID or a block or whatever your selector is, you'll see what what methods are available to you and what properties are available to you. Okay, so you could play around with some of that there. But some of these here can, when you're doing kind of fairly complex stuff, if you're aware of these, it makes it an awful lot easier. Okay, because you can go to next child or the nth child or the last child. It's nice to be able to work around things like that, particularly where we've got a dynamic web application where the page is actually being created on the fly, if you like, by our PHP programming, which is what we'll be doing. So you can change like the visibility, you can hit dot colon hidden, colon visible. So these are like pseudo classes that are useful to have in there. So there's some examples there. okay, which are worth kind of going through. Some useful methods: next, previous, the attribute name and a value, so you can start changing attributes. You can remove class, you can add class, you can toggle class. So toggling class turns it on and off. You can hide, you can show, you can do each. So again, you can, sometimes it can be messy enough in JavaScript to go through an array. Using each then makes it a lot easier, and we'll be doing a lot of that. If you think what we'll be doing shortly is we'll be using the JQuery Ajax functions to be able to move information back and forward, okay, from the server. So we could be bringing an array, a PHP array back and manipulating it then with JavaScript on the client side. Examples that use jQuery methods, if you wanted to get the image, the source of an image, that's a way of doing it there. Okay. If you want to change the source of an image, that's a way of doing it there. Okay. You want to change a CSS element, you can do that. Adding class minus. Event methods: ready, unload, error, click, double click, mouse enter, mouse over, mouse out, hover. That event prevent default is a really useful one, because a lot of the time what we're actually doing inside your browser, events have kind of known consequences. So we do click, we know it's going to submit a form. But if you want to somehow manage a situation when somebody clicks and you're going to do validation, the first thing you want to do is actually prevent the default action, which is to submit, actually taking place. So we'll see ourselves using the prevent default quite a lot. We can then process it and then decide if we're going to submit or not with the submit event. So there's just different things here. And again, it's, you can try these things out. There's the one there for the prevent default. Okay. Event methods: on, off, one, trigger, blind, unblind. Okay, so again, it's giving you details or examples there if you want them or not. Right on click. Do that. Attaching event handlers to two different events. Removing an event handler. Triggering an event handler. So we can write clear.click, so it will actually shortcut the method. Double click. Okay. So here's some code for that. And again, you can try that and you'll see you'll be able to get it. Here's another one here, just swapping images if you wanted to build something up on that. JavaScript there for swapping images. So that's an interesting one to try, particularly if you want to play around with images. Rollover image. So again, just rolling over and it's doing the same effect as moving it. There's an example there which we won't do. We'll just work on the email one. But again, these are interesting ones. The code's given there. You might find some of these are useful for your final projects when you're working through them. Okay. The moment, what I want us to try doing is to get the simple one there to work like this. Okay. So that's the plan with that.